All right. So, time for a kind of a weird discussion. Um, I might meander on through this topic. It's not really well thought out. I just want to talk about what's been on my mind, because basically for a number of months I've basically been just brainstorming things. I've just taken the fundamental uh, concepts and and run with them, taking them to their logical conclusions. The first basis is monism, the ontological basis of monism, which I think has been basically the normal way of thinking for most of humanity, both in science and religion. And it is only until recently that it is weird. So what I'm going to talk about, will sound totally weird, and I might be totally wrong, going off on the wrong direction. But I'm just sticking with monism and running with it. That's all this is. And the reason I make videos and talk about it is to open myself up for criticism. I don't want to go down the wrong path. I want to involve other smart people that have other ways of thinking, and help me come up with criticisms against monism and everything else. Like valid criticisms, not like, oh, your shirt's wrinkled, or oh, you're dumb. No, like actual, you know, in the words of the great and venerable Stefan Molly meme, that's not an argument. Anyway, so I think the title of this video is going to be something like how to defeat death, or something. How to become immortal. Because I've identified the enemy, the ultimate enemy, as death itself. And I've taken upon the mindset that hypothetically death is something that can be overcome. Okay, so hypothetically, and this is so interesting, because it's not just about death. It's not just about, oh yeah, I can live forever. It has to do with ethics as well. I'll get into that. I kind of have some rough notes here. Okay, so first I want to talk about this concept of an eternal flame. An eternal flame, which is something that you see in various religions and whatnot. It's kind of like a symbol, and I've seen it around in like I don't know, like in the Olympics, there's like a flame and they carry the torch. There's a lot of different eternal flames, and they never really, no one can really tell you what it's for, or what it means. And there's probably a few people out there that know, but my understanding of it is that the eternal flame is a symbol for eternal life, or I guess a human or humanity having eternal life. um, because I see the like human life or just life in general as being symbolized by a flame for various reasons. And so an eternal flame is an environment, is a mechanism, a physical mechanism, an actual um, something is happening in the real world um, that makes it so that you live forever. And that's represented by an eternal flame. And that has a lot to do with ethics. And all these things have to do with each other. So basically, the flame itself represents good. Or rather, the flame wanting to continue on and be active is represented as good, and the bad is represented as a flame going out. So if you have a flame that goes forever, then there's not going to be any bad. And so that's what an eternal flame is. There's no possibility of badness occurring because it's going to go on forever. It's an eternal flame. An eternal flame doesn't really exist. So when people create an eternal flame, it's not an eternal flame. They're just they're just feeding it fuel for a long period of time. And if you look up, eternal flames, you don't even have to look it up, but eternal flames, so-called eternal flames, they eventually go out because people stop giving it fuel. So really, there is no eternal flame. It's just people pretending that it's an eternal flame. It's a symbol. So why does the flame represent goodness? Well, the flame, well, there are different aspects to a flame. There's the fuel requirement, there's the oxygen requirement, which you could also see as like a kind of fuel. Maybe it's oxidizer, not really oxygen per se, but an oxidizer, because it's a kind of reaction. And that's the other element of it. There's not an element, that's not a good word, but there's basically the fuel, the oxidizer, and the chemical reaction. Generally, a normal flame, it's a reaction, and it takes in fuel and oxidizer, and then it releases heat, light, and sound. And really, the flame, what in the symbol, the flame represents good. It's not really it's not the fuel that's the good part. It's not really the heat and the light that's being put off the flame as representing good. A lot of people could see it that way. Like the activity of life itself is like a good thing. However, the way I understand it today is that the chemical reaction itself is the good part. The essence of the flame itself, which is to say the desire of the flame's desire to keep going, the chemical reaction. Now, when I use the phrase the desire, I'm not saying that the flame is sentient, and I'm not trying to bring consciousness into this at all. It's just a way of rephrasing the fact that chemical reactions happen um, for an arbitrary reason. It's just how the world works. Chemical reactions happen. And so a way to state that is to say that it wants to. It just, I don't know why. Yeah. But it's like, if you drop a banana, the banana wants to fall to, you know what I mean? I'm not saying that the banana's like planning it out, like, oh yeah, I'm gonna fall. No, it's like, it's just the forces involved. I'm referring to the physical forces. And in the banana case, in the case of the banana, gravity is the force. And gravity is the desire to connect the banana to the earth. And that's what I'm saying is the good thing. And the flame represents that force. Just natural forces. Natural physical forces. The essence. The chemical reaction, the fields. That's the good part. And the bad part is the flame ending. So basically, the flame wants to keep going, but eventually it's going to use up all the fuel. And it's bad because the goodness is ending. That's what badness is the end of goodness. So bad so good is coherence and bad is decoherence. Bad is like the absence of good. It's kind of like the shadow to good. I don't see bad as like, oh, here's the bad entity over here and here's a good entity over here. I really only see it as there's good entities or consciousnesses. Brought consciousness into it. And then there's the lack of that, which is bad. Chaos, confusion, death, all these things. Decoherence. And so, and let's start talking about ethics. So, there's this thing called asceticism where people, basically what they do is asceticism is doing ethical behavior or attempting to do ethical behavior. And the way I understand asceticism is basically pretending to live in an environment that allows one to do good behavior. So in other words, you're pretending like you're Adam or Eve living in the Garden of Eden. And basically you're pretending that you're behaving as if you're in the Garden of Eden. But you're actually not in the Garden of Eden. You're just pretending. And that's kind of what asceticism is. And that matches up perfectly with the eternal flame thing. People continually feed the flame, this eternal flame, but they're just pretending. It's not an actual eternal flame. So basically, it's the same thing as asceticism. You're just pretending to be a perfectly ethical human being, but simply because of your environment, it's not possible. Another way to word it is the flame wants to keep going forever and ever and never end and never be susceptible to death or sin or evil. However, because of the laws of nature, a flame inevitably will go out. And that's kind of like what the conundrum is. The Garden of Eden is basically portrayed as like not of this earth. And that's kind of bad way to put it. It's like the laws of physics are different. There is no death at all. And because there is no death, because the things living there just keep on living, therefore there is no sin, there's no evil. Just how it works out to be. And then when Adam and Eve in this story are ejected from the Garden of Eden, what that really is they become mortal. And death is allowed to enter into the picture, and so Adam and Eve must now survive and have babies and kill animals to get enough nutrients, and so on and so forth. Everything basically stems, all the evil basically stems from the fact that death is inevitable and will occur. So the way I've always looked at it is pretty much like, well, if you want to achieve a real heaven on earth, let's say, you would have to literally change the laws of physics. And it's which people think will happen. They think that if they fulfill the right steps in the prophecy, that God will wave the magic wand and change the laws of physics. And that's how people view it, a change in the laws of physics. Despite the general thought that humanity itself must take steps to bring about their own heaven on earth. So in the past few days, I've kind of considered that that's not really necessary. The changing of the law, you might not need to change the laws of physics at all. So you could see it's a pretty good analogy. A flame could be an analogy for life, or human life, or just humanity in general. Humanity wants to keep on going, and it keeps spreading out and out, consuming more and more fuel. But as the fire spreads, it's leaving just black, charred, consumed fuel. And although it is getting bigger, it's eventually going to run out of fuel. And that's really a deeply rooted. It's like in the back of everyone's mind, kind of like, the population's getting bigger and bigger, and we're using up more and more resources, and over time, and it's like, people they have good intentions. They want to like redistribute the resources and whatever. But it's like it's that hasn't worked. That hasn't worked. The opposite occurs. But it doesn't even matter whether or not it works, because it's like you're trying to make an eternal flame by constantly feeding it more and more fuel, and just pretending like it's eternal. But it's not eternal. It never will be, and it doesn't matter how long you keep feeding it fuel. Eventually, it's going to go out. And I think that's kind of like in the back of everyone's mind. That's just the way that we're kind of seeing things fold out in the grand scheme of humanity. And on a smaller level too, it's like that's what your life, that's what my life is like. It's like, you can do all these things during life, and you can like you can be a part of some religion that says, oh, you're gonna have like eternal life and whatever, but you're gonna die. Like, no, there's no religion out there except for maybe like Scientology that says that you're going to live forever. That's kind of like a modern, it's the modern dualistic take on spirituality, is that your soul is separate from your body and is immortal. But that's very brand new and weird compared to how people have thought for most of humanity. And I agree with monism, not dualism. I don't view the spirit as separate and immortal. I view it as requiring fuel, requiring a body. I am a monist and therefore a materialist. In some, I'm not a physicalist. I believe that experiences exist because I'm having experiences. But okay, so I've been thinking that you have to change the laws of physics. Until recently, you might not have to change the laws of physics, and this is kind of where it gets weird. I'm just brainstorming, okay? And I know no one's gonna listen this far. It's kind of like a vlog, just kind of stating my my ideas here. I also want to mention that it's like our medical technology is increasing so greatly. And yet at this time where our medical technology is so great, we're in a dark age in regards to psychological or spiritual understanding. It's okay. Well, I'm just gonna keep going. Okay, so the essence. I'm talking about the essence of the flame. Before I had this realization that the flame is kind of like the analogy of human life, I was thinking of a permanent magnet, because I've been thinking in terms of magnets about this. My technological analogy for the brain, very loose analogy, is a collection of electromagnets wired together, and those would be like neurons. And so basically that's the flame of your mind. That's your brain. It's a lot of small reactions that require fuel. Requires fuel. I mean, you to fire up that electromagnet, you need to feed it fuel, essentially. And that's basically what the brain is. It's in that sense, it is like a flame that is not eternal. It is going to go out. Your brain isn't going to last forever. And your brain degrades, your neurons degrade. And there are people out there that are working tirelessly to figure out how to stop the brain and the body from degrading. And so that's why I'm making this videos, to brainstorm, to give some more ideas, which are based off of monism. And these people, a lot of these people that are working on this are not basing their ideas off of monism. They're basing their ideas off of physicalism. So basically, what you want to try to do is make those magnets, those electromagnets, permanent magnets. Permanent magnets. Permanent magnets. And this is all just analogies of analogies. This isn't really how the brain works. I'm not saying that consciousness is magnetism, or like a exothermic reaction or something like that. I'm not an expert on the chemistry of the brain. I mean, I have been educated in in this stuff. I have a basic education. I'm not an expert. So my idea is to somehow make those neurons, those electromagnets, turn them into permanent magnets. And there's a big difference between a flame and a magnet. A magnet does not consume fuel, but it also does not put out flame and light and sound. It doesn't put out anything. A lot of people who are like into magnets view magnets as these things that shoot particles out and suck them in, and I think that's all complete bullshit. I don't view a magnet like that at all. I view a magnetic field as an essence, a field, which is simply geometry. It's basically the fabric of reality. It's a description itself, like the color red. It's non-physical. But I don't like using the term non-physical, because the actual definition of what I'm saying, essence, is that it isn't made up of anything. It is the thing that makes up other things. And therefore, it is illogical to ask what it is made out of. See, I'm not trying to dictate what reality is. I'm trying to make it so that my limited human understanding grasps reality in the most accurate way possible, which is not going to be perfect. And so that's monism. So the general concept is to turn the neurons, the electromagnets, into permanent magnets. Meaning that their actual physical structure would be different. Possibly their chemical makeup would have to be different. It would be a brain that might not necessarily be made of the same materials as a brain. It is a brain that would not need nutrients or oxygen from the blood. But also, it is a brain that would not be like a flame. It is a brain that would not have fluctuations of coherence and decoherence. It would be a brain that is in a constant state of coherence. And I imagine that if you or I were looking at such a brain, it would appear to us as an inanimate object, a chunk of something, just a material sitting there. Just like a magnet is a chunk of something sitting there and not doing anything. It just sits there. It's not really a flame, but if you imagined an eternal flame, it wouldn't be a flame at all. It would be something like a magnet. It would be the essence of the flame itself, the chemical reaction, frozen in time. Never really not consuming fuel, but not putting off anything. It's just a permanent coherence, like a permanent magnet. Now, I don't know how permanent a permanent magnet is. I don't know if, let's say, you put a magnet down there and you just let it sit for 30 trillion years, if it would last that long. So I don't know if permanent is really a perfectly accurate term. It might be, I don't know. I'm just saying, I'm being skeptical about that. The actual mechanism of magnetism is not anywhere close to being understood fully. So that's pretty much it. That's what I wanted to say is okay, so also it's really weird to think about that chunk of something, that permanent coherence of this conscious. It would be a conscious object, an inanimate object that's arguably inorganic. It doesn't do anything. It just sits there like a rock. And yet it is perpetually conscious. And I think determined by the actual mass of the object and the level of coherence, that the level of consciousness could be great, very very high level, or like a level of consciousness of a rock. Like you could think of it as like some kind of rock. It would be a very special material arranged in a very particular way. But essentially, it would be like a chunk of material, like a permanent magnet, just sitting there, and yet it would be coherent perpetually, and conscious. I can't imagine what it would be like to be in that state of consciousness. The human brain is it goes in between. It has its range of consciousness. And it's constantly fluctuating. Even if, for example, if you take drugs, you have this particular If your mind is influenced chemically to go in a particular direction, uh, you're still you still have different thoughts. You're still going back and forth between coherence and decoherence, and there's no experience that a person could have with the normal organic brain that would match that experience of that chunk of material, or the level, hypothetically, the level of consciousness that it would be at. Uh, one could say that it would have its own identity, but again, you couldn't possibly imagine what it would be like. It wouldn't be sitting there enjoying the scenery and think, oh, my name is Bob. It wouldn't be like that. It would be totally different. Another thing I want to mention is that if you, a normal person, were to get close to that object, then it would possibly influence your way of thinking, your consciousness. Depending on how large it was, its level of influence, and how close you were to it. Just like how magnets, the closer they get, the more they influence each other. And it would be seen, I think, as an actual physical force. So if it's too strong and you got too close to it, it could actually kill you, rip your brain out of your skull. Sorry for being so graphic, but this is just the logical conclusion of monism. Okay, that's all this is. I'm just taking it to its extremes. I have no way of proving this at all. This is where it would go if we, in our modern medical technology, still had the mindset of monism. This is where we'd be at. So, yeah. I'll continue to think about this kind of stuff, and also how it could be done, how an object like this could be created. Man, that would, if nothing else, that would make an interesting sci-fi story. But I don't see this as sci-fi. I see this as